Today, I'm honored to be joined by Kaki Okumura. Kaki Okumura is a Japanese wellness author and illustrator. Her writing online garners hundreds of thousands of views a month, and she has been published in Insider, Bon Appetit, Eater, TedxGateway, and Heated by Mark Bittman. Her new book, The Art of Balance, Live Healthier, Happier, and Longer the Japanese Way, is now available for sale, and let me tell you, it is an incredible read. As someone who constantly struggles to define balance and find balance in my own life, Kaki makes it so easy to see the 4 pillars of life that lead us to finding harmony: nourish, move, rest, and socialize. The book is incredible. I cannot recommend it enough, and the link is down in the show notes to pick up your own copy. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you enjoy Kaki's writing, I highly encourage you, go check her out on Medium to see even more of her work, check her out on her Instagram, and sign up for her newsletter, all down in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's show and you want to see even more incredible conversations, please follow along and leave a rating. It really is the best way to help grow the show, and I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. Thank you for tuning in to the R20s podcast. Without further ado, Kaki Okumura.
The design of the book is incredible. It feels really good in your hand. And the pages, the artistry, just the color scheme, everything about it is so cool. And I love the attention to detail even before you open up the book as a reader. It just makes the experience even more incredible. And on the front cover, I can't show it to the camera right now, but there's 4 rocks on the cover, and they're stacked on top of each other. And it's just a great visual display of balance. And I think it's so key, especially to the context of the book, because so often when someone asks you, oh, how do you think about balance? They'll picture like the scales balancing out, where you have to put something on one end to get the left and the right to balance out. But balance can also be, you have to have a solid foundation, and then you build up, which I think is a really good metaphor for life as a whole. We have to have a solid foundation, and then we can find that balance as we build up. If we're using that metaphor, what would you say is that beginning foundation rock in your life? And do you think it's something that it took time for you to find, or was it something that's always been there from the beginning?
That's an excellent question. And unfortunately, I can't take credit for, um, like, I did all the illustrations in the book, but the book design was actually, there was a book designer that I was working with, and there was a lot of back and forth, and there was a lot of, yeah, there's just a lot of work that went into it. So I'm really glad they enjoyed it. I feel really proud of the cover that we ended on. And, um, you're right. I think when we went with the imagery of the 4 balancing rocks, it was really, thinking about balance as not, as um, if you lean towards one, that lose balance on something else, but it's about, building that foundation, building it up. And so, yeah, I'm really glad you picked up on that.
Thank you.
To answer your question about, did I always know what that kind of foundation was for me? It's like, definitely not. um, I think this book is almost a product of, me trying to figure that out for myself, and what I wish I would have known in the beginning of, my health and well-being journey. I think, just to give a little bit of background about myself, uh, I was born in the US, I grew up in the US, and growing up here, I really struggled with my health. Um, but I later moved to Japan, and, I just observed that things were done differently there. I think one of the major differences between Japanese and American culture is Americans are very like go big or go home. They love,
Yeah.
taking things to the extreme, and there's a lot of pride in it, whereas, and that's not always a bad thing, but um, you know, co- to kind of contrast that, Japanese culture is a bit more about, modesty, and, not necessarily doing everything to the extreme, but doing things in, small steps, or in a way that kind of takes that middle ground. And when it came to health, I found that that actually applied a lot better to me. And so, when I think about, that foundation to my well-being, it's not necessarily exactly one thing, but I kind of think of them as, in the book, I describe them as pillars. So these 4 pillars are, nourish, which is about eating well; move, which is about, exercise; rest, which is, about slowing down, not burning ourselves out; and then socialize, which is about our social connections. And, when people think about health, I think those first two pillars are, first come to mind. People are like, okay, I want to improve my well being. I should exercise and eat better. But I've realized that when it comes to health, we should also be thinking about, rest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I take a kind of interesting approach to rest in that it's not just about like, how do we get better sleep and how do we slow down? And it definitely encompasses that, but it's also about um, rest defined as how do we restore our energy? How do we feel more energized by our daily lives? And, sometimes that is the form of like taking a nap and slowing down, but other times it's about, leaning into our curiosities or even challenging ourselves, which I feel like, might feel a little, um, yeah, ironic when you're talking about rest, but, when you're working really hard towards something, sometimes you get really into the zone and you feel really motivated, even if you're working really hard. And I can find that leaning into things that give you that energy also applies to rest. And then, yes, there's socialize, which is, you know, there's an interesting TED talk. I forget who it's by, but it's about the longest study on longevity and happiness. And one of the major findings was just, our social connections are really important when it comes to how satisfied people are with their lives. And I do a lot of research on blue zones, which are um, special areas in the world where people live really long and live really healthy lives. And a big part of that research conclusion is that, people are part of these really close knit communities and they feel really connected to the people around them, which, helps their well being. So that's a really long answer for a pretty simple question. But yeah, I think when it comes to my foundation, it's really about my health, thinking both physically and also mentally. And then I kind of divide that out into those four pillars.
Never apologize for a long answer. I love long answers. It just it fools my heart to hear other people talk about something that they're so passionate about and they go into great detail about it. So I'm always appreciative for a long answer. So throughout this whole interview, don't be afraid. But
I was
the
like, oh no, I'm talking too long.
no, don't worry about it. The four pillars, you touched on it there, and it's those last two really that, especially in America, and you were in Texas and you were in New York. Those are two of the biggest go big or go home type of states,
Oh yeah.
and especially the cities in there too. Everything's bigger in Texas. New York's the Big Apple. There is this stigma in New York, especially. I'm in New York as well, where you can sleep when you're dead, and
Mm.
if you're socializing, you better be, I don't know, partying until the sun comes up, or you better be networking to grow in some respect in your career or trying to get some personal advantage out of it. And I hate that. And I use hate very intentionally. And I think word choice is very intentional. And I try to be as intentional as I can with my word. And I think what I loved about your word choice too is it says it right on the book that Wa, the title of the book, first of all, Wa, the art of balance, but Wa is harmony. We're looking to be in harmony with the world around us. And far too often, especially in an area like New York, we're just willing to let the world pass us by as we do our own thing. And it's not necessarily that we're in the pursuit of happiness, it's more trying to pursue this peace, fulfillment, and ultimately contentment. And I think that's a key difference because happiness can be more experiential, where we have something go on in our lives and happiness comes and it goes fairly quickly. But contentment, similar to how I view joy in the sense of this podcast, is very long lasting. And again, it's associated with that peace and gratitude. And yet, peace and gratitude are two of the hardest things for Americans, especially to seemingly find. And we constantly struggle with that.
Yeah.
And I want to focus on gratitude first and foremost because just reading the book, studying Japanese culture, gratitude seems to be instilled from a very young age. And all you have to do is look at examples that mystify Americans. So, for example, the World Cup just took place. Everybody was mystified by how the Japanese fans would stay after the World Cup and clean up all the garbage that was in the stands, and how the Japanese soccer team would leave their locker room looking immaculate, and everyone would say, "Oh my gosh, it's the culture. Look at that." It Of course it's the culture, but it's also this gratitude where they're grateful to just be a part of the experience, and they want to treat it as if it's precious, because everything in life is precious, and they want to show the maximum amount of gratitude for what they have. Why do
Yeah.
you, why do you think people in America get so caught up with gratitude? We're so quick to write off the little things in life and not pay enough attention to them that we absolutely should be.
I will give you kind of a roundabout answer, and I hope it answers your
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
But um, yeah, the idea of, I think Japanese culture, and I think this is instilled from a very young age, is there's a focus on the individual's role in a community. So you think about American culture, there's a lot of like American exceptionalism. People in school are taught that, you're unique. Um, you can personally do incredible things. You can be exceptional. And that's kind of like part of its main value system. Nothing wrong with that.
Hmm.
But contrast to that, Japan is a bit more okay. You're an individual in a community, and you have a responsibility to that community, and that community, will also serve you.
Yeah.
But it's about um, compared to a culture that's very focused on the individual, it's about, you know, it's a bit more of a collectivist society, and that may have negative connotations, but exactly like you mentioned, when it comes to, you know, like bigger social events like the World Cup, people can come together and, the audience will clean up after themselves. You visit Tokyo, it's one of the biggest cities in the world, but the streets are immaculate. Um, Things just work there.
Yeah.
um, you visit New York and you'll never know what you'll see, but um, there's a sense of personal responsibility towards the bigger group, and I think that kind of there's less, and when there's a lot of pressure on the individual being like you're exceptional, you're special, that can be motivating in ways, but it can also it puts a lot of personal responsibility on people, and um, when things don't go your way, it's like your fault and you need to solve it. And I think that's also reflected in the attitude towards personal health in the US.
Yes.
Whereas, Japan is a bit more, historically, it's an island that's placed on the ring of fire, which means that there's a lot of earthquake, there's a lot of tsunamis, there's just a history of being subject to, things outside of your control, and that there's a need to come together as a community to, just survive through it. And it's not necessarily your personal fault, but by accepting, some situations and taking responsibility for that, um, I think helps people, feel great, uh, feel, yeah, feel more content when things don't necessarily go their way. And I feel like I talk about like, first, if you're not aware, in 2011, there was a big like natural disaster in Japan. There's a large earthquake, a tsunami followed, hit nuclear reactors. There's a whole mess. But during this time, a lot of Japanese people, they practice something called jishuku, which is the practice of kind of restraining from fun, which sounds kind of strict, but the idea was,
Hmm.
you know, the country is going through a whole tragedy. We should, kind of stay at home, show, compassion for the people who, you know, were like affected more harshly than people who weren't. There are first responders working like 24/7. You don't want to be, um, the focus is not on yourself. It's about like, okay, what can I do for others right now? People weren't, you know, going out and throwing these big parties or, hoarding a lot of things. Whereas I think when COVID hit, Japan kind of responded in a similar way. It's like, okay, let's not hoard things. let's, COVID, if you're out, like, let's, not leave our house. Let's respect those rules. There was no law in place being like, you can't leave the house, but many people didn't leave. If you left the house, people were wearing masks. There's no anti-masking, revolts. But in the US, you see certain, it wasn't uncommon for people to not wear masks, to leave their house. And there's a lot of focus on like, yourself and your own, what you want to do rather than,
Yeah.
okay, how can we come together during this time? And um, I feel as though, in a way, when there's so much focus on yourself rather than your place in the community, you can kind of get lost and caught up in that, and it's easier to feel discontented. Whereas, if you see yourself relative to other people and relative to, the community you're in, there's a lot more peace, and you could feel a bit more grateful for what you do have and what you can do for others.
That was beautifully said. And it's so true. Being in New York, it can feel so easy to be in the biggest city in the world and you feel completely isolated and alone.
Hmm.
And that's all because of the psychology and the mindset that you have, that you're in this city to be the one that has your name in the shining lights or make it to the height of whatever industry you may be participating in.
Yeah.
There's a very large disconnect between contributing to a community in the city. You have to really seek one out to find it. It's not going to come to you. And especially for young people making that transition into a big city, coming out of school, maybe they transitioned right out of some small town, didn't even go to school, and just went straight to a big city.
Hmm.
It can be a shock to a lot of people. And I think
Yeah.
you said it very well, especially in the States. It's very psychological how we've been raised and brought up, that there's this value towards the self over the community. And I think once people get a taste of what it feels like to really contribute to a community, not to contribute to a community um, in hopes of some reward. I think when someone finally contributes to a community just because they feel good inside and it's the right thing to do, that's when they finally get the taste and then they start to do it more and more. But until then, it can be a really vicious cycle to break. Um, and you'll see that with a lot of goals that people try to come up with, where someone will come up with a goal and they'll say to themselves, I need to do this because this is to the benefit of me. And they'll shut out the world around them and they won't listen to what other people have to say. Maybe they're trying to give them advice or really constructive criticism, but the person will be so focused on the goal that they won't even appreciate the journey that they're on.
Mm.
And that to me is the most joyous part, where you never know where the journey is going to take you. And if you're so focused on a goal, of course, having goals are phenomenal. I think everyone should have goals. But we're just talking about the danger that comes with having the goals and being so focused on the future instead of being focused on the present. With
Yeah.
with this book especially, this is somewhere that I guarantee that if you asked yourself if you were like 13, 14, you probably weren't expecting to write a book before your 25th birthday. Um, just this whole journey of writing this book. How did
Yeah.
you just stay in tune with the journey? How did you find so much joy out of the journey? I know when you first get approached about writing a book, that goal can be daunting, especially if it was never on your mind to begin with. But can you just describe the process and just how fun was it to take some articles that you had written online and you corresponded with people who have fallen in love with your work and you're able to compile it into a piece of work that, you know, 15, 20 years from now, you can look on a bookshelf and you can say, I wrote that. Like, that's really cool.
Thank you. And, I will put an asterisk. It's not like I did enjoy writing this book, but it wasn't 24/7. Like, I was in love with the process and I'm smiling, like drinking my tea and feeling really good about it the entire time. Like writing a book, it was a lot of work and it was much more work than I thought. And there are moments where I, really struggled with it. I I think some people might resonate with this, but when I feel very, um, I can be a bit of a perfectionist. And when I am unsure about how something will turn out and I get a little anxious, I have a tendency to procrastinate. Um,
Same.
sometimes, I'd rather like not do something than, figure out that I tried and it didn't go the way I wanted. And, I'd procrastinate. I'd be like, oh, I have time. But then, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I really need to get this done, put my head down. Um, and so, moments like that, I kind of tried to adopt this idea of, things don't need to be perfect. And there is this Japanese, it's like a slang term. It's YDK, which it stands for Yareba Dekiru Ko. Um, and it directly translates to like a child who can if they just do. That's like kind of a rough translation of it. And
Yeah.
it's a slang term, YDK. Like, if you are someone who's like considered smart but don't study too much, like your friends might call you like, oh, you're such a YDK. Like, if you just
Yeah.
tried, you could. Or, um, like, it can be kind of condescending, but I liked to embody that kind of idea of, a child.
Yeah.
Ko is child in Japanese, but the idea that, children kind of do things without thinking too deeply about them. If you observe them in a classroom, they'll probably just say things on their mind, not really knowing, you know, how
Yeah.
people are going to respond. If they are, given crayons and some sheets of paper, they'll draw craziest things. You put them out on a playground, they'll, you know, make things up on the swings. If they'll go on the slide, if things don't turn out the way they don't really think about it. They just kind of do it. Um, and if they don't really worry about like, oh, like, how can I go on the swings most perfectly, or will I enjoy this, or I
Yeah.
need to, I need to do this right. Like, they just don't worry about those things. So it's kind of taking this idea of like, okay, writing a book, um it's almost like the playground of, experimenting with different kinds of writing, different kinds of topics, different ways of approaching those topics. And, you know, my book is about teaching people, but there's an element of storytelling to it. And so, how do I tell that story? How do I deliver those messages? And being able to experiment with different ways of writing and knowing that, you know, it may not be perfect, it may not be exactly what I imagined, but there's some things where, you try something, if it doesn't work out, like, it's fine, move on to the next thing. And
Yeah.
I kind of try to embody that as, I was writing this book. And I think that mindset can apply to a lot of our goals. Um, when, people come to me for health advice, you know, I try to encourage them to embody this like childlike, curious mindset of, like, if you tried something, it's not the end of the world. I think a lot of people, they'll set these goals, and if they don't turn out exactly the way they expected, it can be unmotivating. But it's about accepting this idea that things not going right is like part of the process. A really straightforward example is like, New Year's resolutions. A lot of people be like, I'm going to go to a gym
Yeah.
3 times a week. um, and then if they don't go to the gym, they're like, I'm a failure, I'll never become healthy, I hate exercise, and this just isn't for me. And to that, I would respond like, okay, like, you clearly didn't continue going to the gym, and like, that's totally fine. That just means the gym is not for you. There are
Yeah.
multiple ways to exercise. Maybe your thing is hiking, or maybe it's about joining a recreational sports team. Maybe it's about doing like yoga classes or dance classes. You can do tennis classes. um, you can just take, go to the park with your friends, and maybe a daily walk is your thing. There are so many different ways to exercise, and it's not about being hyper focused on that. Like, okay, I need to go to the gym to become healthy, but it's about experimenting with different things that you might like. And, the correct answer is the answer that is sustainable for you.
Hmm.
It applies to healthy eating as well. Like, there are many ways to approach, healthy eating. And I won't say one way is better than the other, but the way that works for you is the best one. And so, with any goals we have in life, our career, our, um, you know, uh, where our lifestyle, if the first job we choose is not going to be the job that we're going to
Yeah.
stay with for the rest of our lives, and it shouldn't be. Um, you go to any a coach and they're going to tell you like quitting is often a really good answer for some people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think when it comes to setting goals and, enjoying that process and being more focused on that journey, it's about, accepting that things are not going to go your way and that is expected and it should actually happen if, you're only doing one thing and you're forcing yourself to do it. It's not sustainable. It's not going to carry you very far and you're going to hate it. Whereas if you're staying curious, if you're kind of accepting like, oh, like I just want to try this out. It might not work out, but that's cool. Then it's a lot easier to enjoy that process.
Yeah, if you're never failing, you're never growing. And and I love the message that you have layered in there where you're not going to read the book, you're not going to read any book, and they're going to tell you, "Oh, here is the formula for balance."
Yeah.
um, it is so incredibly individualized, but the most important takeaway that you said there is you have to have variety. You have to be willing to try different things to see what works best for you. Even if you think something's working really good for you, of course, keep going, but sprinkle in something new while you're doing it. And I think that applies really well to the nourishment pillar that you discuss in the first section of the book.
Mhm.
And you're talking about different forms of storytelling. The anecdotal storytelling to me is so impactful because, of course, I don't think anyone could ever truly relate to a story 100%, but there's always certain aspects that you can pick out. And for me, I was kind of the opposite when I was a child. I was really skinny,
Mhm.
like really skinny. And I was big into sports. And as I entered into high school, I was like, I need to get bigger. I need to start eating more food if I want to play sports at a higher level. And I got to the point where I was exercising all the time and I was eating a lot of foods. And even to this day, I 100% have a form of a body dysmorphia where I'll look at my
Mhm.
body in the morning, I'll say, "Oh, I look great today," and then I'll come home at the end of the day and I'll be like, "What happened?" like, like nothing happened. You can't gain 3-4 pounds in a day. Maybe it's
Yeah.
water. Maybe it's just the change in pressure or something. Maybe it's just your eyes playing tricks on you. But that's the kind of relationship that I still have with food. I'll restrict myself all the time in terms of calories in the name of trying to look better.
Mm.
And you develop this hate relationship. It's not even love hate, it's just hate,
Yeah.
where it becomes some form of a chore. But when I allow myself to open up and at the holidays, I'll snack, it's in moderation. As long as you're doing it in moderation, that's the best thing that you can do. And you're living the best life that you possibly can be. You're getting fulfillment and joy. And that comes from variety. It comes from finding, okay, maybe I don't need to restrict my diet so heavily that I don't even like eating anymore.
Yeah.
It's trying to balance out, okay, if I do this amount of exercise, I can eat this kind of food and I can still stay in that range. And just trying a lot of different foods. And variety with food is something that's really prevalent in the book. And I've actually never heard you say this before. So I'm just curious. If you had to make your ideal, just like one meal, and it had a good amount of variety in it, what are some of the go tos?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, um, yeah, I think, I'll have to go with Japanese food and one of my it's yeah, I'm pulling this kind of also from the book, but
Yeah.
there is a um, Japanese meal setup. It's the word for it is like ichiju sansai, which translates to one soup, three sides. And
Hmm.
if you go to like a Japanese restaurant, like a traditional one, it's like a very common form of how they'll serve meals. And, I think a lot of like home cooking meals are also set up like this. But the idea is like, okay, one soup is like a miso soup usually, and there's like hundreds of variations of miso soup. But it'll be like one single serving of miso soup, a bowl of rice, and that's also a single serving. And then the three sides, it'll be like one protein dish. Traditionally, that's usually grilled fish, but nowadays it's like it can be any form of meat. Um, or like a tofu dish. But it's like one protein dish and then like two vegetable side dishes. And so, everything is portioned out in like a single portion. So, you can have all these things and like finish it very comfortably. But
Yeah.
when I think of like variation in a meal, it's like my favorite way to enjoy food because, I got my soup, but I got my rice, which I can enjoy with like my sides. And, it's not just like, I think when I go to like an American restaurant, it's like, okay, one big bowl of pasta or one ginormous steak. But I find myself like, after like half of it, I'm like, okay, like, it's the same flavor for the entire time. But if I
Yeah.
have like the vegetable side, the protein dish, like I feel like I just have a lot of things to enjoy in one meal. So yeah, that's like one of my favorite ways to enjoy food. If you ask me to like choose a specific dish, that's kind of hard, but
Oh, it's like asking what's your favorite song. I will have a different answer every day.
yeah, no, exactly. Oh.
No, that question was solely just for me. If anyone else got enjoyment out of that, I'm glad that you did. But I just need to expand my food palette. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. But the whole nourishment section is great. There's a lot of different topics covered, especially on the psychology of
Mm,
food, where we just touched on it, where moderation and just eating until satisfaction as opposed to eating until you're full. It's just the little things that you can do to train your mind, and I highly encourage you. You got to check out the book to see the tips. They're truly great, and they apply to not just the nourishment section as well. They apply to every other pillar that is discussed in the book. And if you're willing to just do a little 1 + 1 = 2 in your head, you can see how you can apply it to all the different pillars in your life, and it really makes everything click. Especially moving on to the second pillar, when you're thinking about, okay, movement.
mm.
I don't I sometimes we have this hate relationship with exercise, which you
Yeah.
just talked about. And I think that certainly comes from, if you're trying to get into exercise for the first time, it's really difficult to get
Mhm.
into the pattern of it. But it also comes from this uh, bombardment that we see online of, oh, these are perfect looking models and this is what they do to
Mhm.
exercise. And they never tell you exactly what they're doing. They never tell you what might be happening behind the scenes. They just paint this picture for you. And it makes you think that you have to do something in order to be in a certain status when it comes to how your body can look or the type of physical feats that you can achieve. It's not true.
Yeah.
And you touched on it earlier. You have to just find what works for you. Walking is just as good as running. If just
Yeah.
move around and get something done. It took me so long to get into running. I actually just got into running like very heavily not too
Mhm.
long ago, like a couple months ago. I did my first couple half marathons.
Wow.
And I saw that you did one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did it in Stockholm?
Yeah, I think it was, I mean, I always liked running. I don't usually run long distances. I'd run like, maybe 30 minutes is my
Yeah.
typical one session, but um yeah, I was studying abroad in Sweden. A couple of my, classmates were doing it, and at first I was kind of like, half marathon, not really for me. It seems like, a lot of running. But like Sweden is like, or at least Stockholm is very flat and the roads are really nice. And I was like, how many times am I gonna have this opportunity to do this in like a different country? So yeah, I guess in the end it was like it wasn't that expensive. It seemed like a fun event. A lot of, my friends are doing it, so I was like, okay, I guess I'll do this. I didn't put any pressure on the time or the pace. I barely did any training for it, which I don't recommend, but um yeah, it was so much fun. And I will say, like, if you haven't ever ran, don't jump into the half marathon bucket. I was doing a bit of running on my own before that, so I was able to complete it. But yeah, it was such a fun experience, and I haven't run a race since that, so maybe it wasn't as fun as I thought. But there's a lot of, yeah, there's a big sense of accomplishment, and I'm really glad I did that. And I think one of the things I do want to do is, yeah, do another race in a different city and be able to compare it. I actually, there was recently Boston Marathon. I think it was last
Yeah.
Monday.
Yeah.
And I was reading a bunch of, articles and just like there's just more media around marathon running. And I came across this interesting thing called the Kipchoge Challenge.
Oh
And
yeah.
if
Yeah.
you don't know what that is, it's so um, Kipchoge's like he's the fastest marathon runner in the world. He's basically done the 26 miles in 2 hours, which is an insane pace of 13 miles per hour. And this Kipchoge challenge is about how long can you run at that pace. And so it's like just this fun thing, but people are posting videos of just how long they could run, and these really fit people could only do like a minute or 2 minutes max. And it's like really humbling to watch because there's this guy who's the fastest man and he looks really like calm and graceful doing it. So I think people are really surprised when they actually try it for themselves because they're like panting out of breath.
He,
But it kind of made me curious about like just marathon runners. Running a marathon is it's really intense. It's a lot of work. It's pretty grueling to say the least.
yeah.
But I think people really enjoy it because um, I realized it's a very optimistic sport. Um, and I say this because um, I was reading this interview. Oh, I forgot her name. It was Helen. Um, I'll need to look this up later. But Helen something. She actually won the women's marathon, and I was reading a New York Times interview with her, and it was kind of like, what's your recommendation for people running, or um, you know, and her tip was basically like, um, the moment you think you're tired, like it's over. It's gonna
Yeah.
be hard. You're gonna hate it. But she kind of repeats this mantra to herself as she's running, like, I'm strong, I'm strong. Whenever she feels like a dip coming, she kind of just reminds herself of that. And I realized that if you run a marathon, I feel like it's a thought that comes across everyone's mind. Certainly came across my mind when I was running my half marathon, but it was like you kind of have to self-talk like, you know, you can do this, you're strong, you got this, you're gonna finish this. Like it's like a lot of positive self-talk. And I think everyone who crosses that finish line like needs to remind themselves of that, like that, hey, you got this, you're capable, um, you're strong, you're running, you got this. And that positive self-talk and then that sense of accomplishment at the end, I think it's really rewarding for a lot of people, which is why a lot of runners enjoy the sport. But yeah, it's made me realize you have to be very optimistic to do it. And so it's kind of like renewed my respect for runners and the sport of it. I wouldn't ever call myself a competitive runner, but yeah, I feel like it was a good lesson in terms of, mindset matters when we exercise, the point of view that we take and how we talk to ourselves during it. So, if you're doing a certain exercise and the only thought running through your head is like, oh God, I hate this, I'm so tired, like this sucks, like it's gonna suck, like you're not gonna enjoy it. But if you can find something that encourages you to take on that mindset of like, okay, I got this. This is like, I'm strong. I'm fun. Like, this is fun for me. Like, I'm enjoying this. Like, if that's the kind of optimistic self-talk that goes through your head, I find that it just clicks for people. And, getting into the routine of exercise becomes a lot easier. And, we don't need to run to get good exercise. We certainly don't need to run a marathon, but finding any form of movement that you enjoy that has kind of encourages that positive self-talk, I think is a really sustainable way to find something that you enjoy.
I keep laughing to myself because I was a rower in college,
Yeah.
and far too many times I had that conversation in my own head about how much this was terrible, and, and just the pain that I was in. Oh, it would happen all the time. And the phrase that they would say to us all the time, I think it originated maybe from the Navy SEALs,
Yeah.
was they would say, when you think you're done, you're really only 40% of the way done.
uh,
And that was their phrase to just
try to say that like your mind will quit before your body does all the time.
Mm.
And it's just that mental reinforcement that you have to tell yourself that you are strong and you can keep going. And it did work over time, especially when we were in races. It was a much different environment, much more adrenaline, and it just felt better as opposed to just being on like a rowing machine, just like staring at the wall. That got a little bit brutal at sometimes, but it's so true. I hope I can be able to run a marathon
Yeah.
sometime soon. My friend was telling me about this one I would love to do. I think it's in Norway,
Oh wow.
where it's on the day, I think it's the first day of the year where the sun doesn't set. So they run it, I don't know if it's at midnight or just on the day.
Oh
And
my.
it looks so cool. And same kind of ordeal where like, oh, if I was ever in a foreign country, like that would just be a fun like thing to try. So
Yeah.
I had my sights set on that. I think it takes place in June. So June 2024. I'll I'll send you a note if I end up doing it.
Yeah,
But
I'll check in.
it's those kinds of just physical goals. Like, yeah, of course setting the goal is awesome, but it's the journey that's even
Mhm.
cooler. And then when you do it, I think that transitions perfectly into the third pillar, which is rest,
Yeah.
where you can't do exercise, you can't be on a health grind 24/7. You will burn out.
Yeah.
You can't be working 24/7. I don't care what your career is. I don't even care if it's podcasting and it's something that you love. You'll burn out 100%. If it's something that you love completely, you'll still burn out. You need to have that balance in your life. And I was thinking about my own personal relationship with rest because you alluded it to it earlier. You don't talk about rest in the book specifically about sleep. And of course, sleep is important.
Mhm.
But you were talking about rest and just finding activities that recharge you or just make you think in a different way. And my personal relationship with rest is I always feel like I need to keep working. Where
Mm.
if I'm resting, I'm wasting time, is what I'll tell myself all the time. And that's not true. And I think rest can be associated with socializing too. And it can definitely leak into that fourth pillar where spending time with friends and recharging yourself, it's crucial. And when I was preparing for this interview and I was just thinking about like ways that I've been exposed to Japanese culture before, and I wasn't coming up with many, but I was like, you know what is absolutely true that I've been exposed to ever since I was a little kid is video games.
Mm.
And I love so many Japanese video games have been at like the forefront of my childhood and some of my fondest memories, like Mario, Pokemon when I was younger. Now
Yeah.
that I'm older, I love. I don't know if you're too familiar with video games, but I love. There's a series called like Dark Souls, which are
Mm.
like
A little bit.
some of the yeah, some of like the hardest video games on the planet, but they're so fun and stimulating because they make you think differently, and they just make you like problem solve. And of course, I'll think to myself like, oh, if I'm playing for a while, like I'm wasting time. But
Mm.
if it's every once in a while, it's in moderation, like we were talking about with food or
Yeah.
with exercise, it's a beautiful thing just to recharge and get back into the zone. So when you do go back to work, you feel good and you feel like you're ready to take on the day.
Yeah.
One of one of those things for you is watercoloring, which I think is a really cool one. What is it specifically just about painting and using watercolors that it puts you at ease and it recharges you? And has that been something you've been doing since you were a kid, or is it something that kind of developed into a hobby as you got older?
Yeah. Okay. I will answer your question, but I kind of
Yeah,
want to go back a little bit on the idea of rest. And I think your first question to me was, about foundations. And
yeah,
I actually might want to adjust my answer. I mean, you can keep the earlier part. That still applies, but something I talk a lot or that I bring up pretty often, overtly or kind of subtly, is that um, big part is self compassion, and I think that is super foundational to anything about self improvement or trying to improve your well being. Is that kind of meet yourself where you're at. Things won't go perfectly, but having self compassion for like not having to be on all the time. So I totally understand like this need to work all the time. I think especially with so much exposure to the internet, it seems like everyone's doing everything all the time and that you're constantly behind. But
yeah,
having self compassion for those moments of I just want to do this. Like, I want to play video games because, this is how I recharge. I find it fun. You don't even need to find a good
yeah,
reason. It's just like, it's just fun for me and I feel better after doing it. And so having a lot of self compassion for yourself kind of allows you to do those things. I think when we're really hard on ourselves, things like that we typically enjoy actually, stress us out. It's like, oh, like I love video games, but now I feel bad for doing it, and it kind of like goes into this negative cycle. So,
Yeah.
um, self-compassion, if that's something that you struggle with, I would say that's very foundational. So, keep leaning into it, build that positive self-talk. Um, so yeah, I was just thinking about that as we were talking about, yeah, the difficulty that comes with rest.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because it's hard to do, and I think we should recognize that.
It
um,
absolutely is. Yeah.
to answer your question about watercoloring, um, yeah, I've always really, so I studied, well, yeah, I studied econ in college because I've always been kind of good with numbers and very quantitative stuff, but I've
Hmm.
always really enjoyed art. So growing up, I liked to draw. I liked to, write stories. I like to paint. That's the watercoloring. And I've always had like this kind of creative itch. Um, and I think, you know, I'll speak a bit about how this writing actually began. Is that, studying econ in college, like my goal was never to become like a writer or like a storyteller.
Yeah.
I kind of stumbled into it in that um, there's this platform called Medium, which is where I first started writing. And I'd read a lot of stories, and there's a lot that I resonate with, and it kind of inspired me to start telling my own, um, and like just share my own ideas. So if you like go on my profile and go way, way, way back, you'll find that I'm writing about the most random things. There's no like theme to it like there is now. I just write about anything that caught my interest, and from there, it's very therapeutic to me to, you know, I feel like writing is kind of like a processing. Um, there's a lot of processing that goes on. So, you have an idea, you write it out, and trying to like form your thoughts into, you know, coherent opinions or takeaways, or even if it doesn't come to that, but just, into more questions. Um, I found that process very therapeutic, and part of the watercoloring is about, you know, I think when it comes to words, like I don't always express my ideas the best way. Whereas if I can supplement that with artwork, I feel like I can translate those messages or that tone a little bit better. Um, and, when I'm writing, I also kind of envision something in my head about like, I'll write a statement, but there's like kind of an image that goes within my head, and I want to
Yeah.
be able to translate that. So, I kind of draw something and scan it and upload it with my writing. I feel like, for there are many ways that people like to absorb stories, and, words are definitely one of them. But I think we're finding that, sometimes imagery works better, and that can kind of, I'm also finding, with video, like audio works really well for others, and there are multiple ways to kind of express a certain thought or idea. So, yeah, the artwork has, um, sometimes it's a labor of love. It's, time consuming, and
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to just write things than having to illustrate for it. But I feel like it's an important component of, what I do have to share. So, yeah, I think I'll definitely continue to do it. And it is something that, yeah, it gives me a bit more energy, I'd say.
Well, I highly encourage you to keep doing it. I mean, they're beautiful illustrations. Where we can relate is that we're both numbers people. So I studied math when I was in school.
Mm.
Where we can't relate is that I can't draw at all. Uh, if I attempt to draw, it is some of the worst stick figures you've ever seen in your whole life. But it's so true that doing the more analytical side, it was always what I envisioned myself doing,
Yeah.
and I just kind of stumbled into being more creative, where
Mhm.
I found myself not being as fulfilled as I would like to have been,
Yeah.
and just doing something more creative. I initially started writing. I tried doing a blog for a little bit, and I love writing, I
Yeah.
think you could be creative, but I don't think writing allows you to be as tonally correct as you would like to be. Some people can't pick up on I love to be sarcastic too. So some people can't pick up like on sarcasm when I was trying to write. And
Yeah.
I think just getting into speaking and meeting new people too. When I was writing, I wasn't getting to actually talk with anybody. So
Mm,
just having conversations with people has been such a blessing, and it's been something that has just really fueled my fire creatively. And I want to get into art. I really do. I say that seriously.
yeah.
I interviewed a couple shows ago. She does a lot of freelance artwork, and she really inspired me to try to try to pick up drawing again. And now you've inspired me to do it too. So if I ever get around to doing it, I will send you that note, letting you know that I ran a marathon in a foreign country, and I'll have a note on it. And it fits really well that you mentioned your writing because. As a part of my job, it's to be a little bit of an internet sleuth and go as far back as I can. To see what I can do. And it's really funny that we keep talking about, sending each other postcards with illustrations on them because I think it fits really well with the theme of, there's joy in the little things and just not being so enthralled on the day to day stuff and just taking a step back, doing something really nice for someone else. You talk about it in the social life section of the book, where
Mhm.
if you just get someone a gift, it can really mean a lot to the experience. You sent a postcard to someone really cool who people might not know about, but I'm going to say his name anyway. His name is Simon Sinek.
Oh my God.
He's a
You
he's
found
a
that?
really he's a really good. I don't even know if motivational speaker is the way to categorize him. He's just a really good thinker and a really good speaker. And you send him a postcard, and I'll let you tell a story about what comes next.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe you found that story. Um, yeah, so I don't I don't even remember when I did this. I think I might have been in no, I was in college, but basically, his TED Talk, I think it's called Start With Why. He also has a book with the same title. And I was really inspired by it. And yeah, I won't go too deep into his book, but it was about, starting with thinking about like why you do things. And that's kind of where people come together and where motivation comes from and good ideas come from. But I read this book. I felt really motivated by it. And I, just wanted to share that I really appreciated his writing and his ideas. And so I wrote him a letter. I don't remember how I found the address for it. It was probably on his website or something. I don't know if it's still there. Um, but I found an address and I was like, people probably don't do this in this day and age. People write emails, people send messages, people don't really write. But I felt like when it comes to expressing how I feel, there's something about handwriting something, there's something about like, you know, doing something by hand. You can see a bit more of the motion. I think that's also
Yeah.
why I like drawing things. Um, and so I wrote him this letter and I wasn't expecting anything. And for a while, nothing came back. I think it was like months. But I got this letter in the mail. No, this package in the mail. And it was like, it didn't say his name. It was like, I think it was his company's name. And I was like, wait, whoa, what is this? Because I totally forgot about the letter at that point. I just sent it and it kind of, just um yeah, I just completely forgot about it. This package came in the mail and inside he like sent a sign. Oh, and I asked him for a signature in my letter and I put in a postcard with a stamp. So it's already ready and it had my address written on it. And I was like, all you need to do is sign it and then drop in the post office. And so
Yeah.
um but I wasn't really expecting an answer. It's more like, I'll try this out. Let's see if it works. Um, and then I get this whole package back, and it's a book. It's it was one. It was a book that he wrote. I think this one was like Start With Why, and then there's an like he did an illustrated book, so he also signed that and sent that to me. He signed like a postcard. He gave me like a gift set. It was just like way, way above and beyond what
Wow.
I would have expected, what anyone would have expected. It was so kind. And, you know, this is a guy who has like millions of followers. He's the kind of person where like if you ask him to speak at an event, he'll probably charge you like $50,000 because he's just that good. And I just wrote him a letter, and to have him do all of that for me, it meant a lot. He Yeah, he's a great guy. Not that I've personally spoken to him, but I follow a lot of his material even now, and I constantly go to back to his book for inspiration when I feel stuck. So yeah, I think, you know, some people kind of feel out of our reach, but people are people at the end of the day. So if you can express, gratitude towards someone and say thank you, even if you've never personally connected with them, I think that goes a really long way in making the person feel, really appreciated and grateful, and also motivated, inspired. It's kind of like a positive feedback cycle. So yeah, that was a really, I'm glad you reminded me of that memory because, yeah, when it comes to gratitude and, just sharing that positive um, response, I think you never know how you can influence someone else. And yeah, we might not always get that response back, but I think, you know, it never hurts. And sharing how, yeah, someone has helped you, I think just,
Yeah.
yeah.
I always agree. You
Back.
got to put positivity out into the world, and you never know. You really never know unless you ask
Yeah.
how close you truly are, especially in the social media age. How close you are to meeting somebody. Hey, you asked me 4 months ago. I never thought we would be here today. You were someone who was out of my reach. So again,
Oh
I'm just grateful just to have these kinds of conversations. It really is special just to meet someone new and have an amazing conversation.
no. Hmm.
And I can't thank you enough. It's been awesome today.
Of
And
course.
I want to finish with one other cool thing that I found while I was internet sleuthing. I don't want to call it stalking because this is professional. I was internet sleuthing. But I had read that you have this list on your phone. I don't know if it's a list or just a conglomeration of maybe it's just like photos or something, but you called it good things to remember.
Oh yeah.
Do you still do that, or is that
Yeah. Um, yeah, I know I do it, and I constantly go back to it. But yeah, good things to remember is basically like it is what it sounds like. I'll take screenshots of like positive messages of people saying like thank you or nice things about my work and how it's impacted them.
mm-hmm,
And I just save it into like a photo album. Or like if it came in an email, I just like I have like a special tag for that email. So yeah, if I ever need some motivation or kind of reassurance, like, with the internet, it's such, and especially with writing, it's such a one-way communication. So you don't always get that response. But when I do get those responses, I like really, really cherish them.
that's awesome.
Hearing back from readers, I feel like is really special to me and is one of my favorite parts about writing. Um, and yeah, like I feel like, positivity it's like a it's like a muscle, really. You have to, you know, kind of flex it in ways. And if reminding, things that um, people have said positively about you gives you confidence, motivation, just reminding yourself of that, I feel like goes a long way in, helping you build that your own confidence or your own sense of contentment and joy.
Absolutely. And I hope you don't mind. I might steal that one. if I
No,
if
of course.
if I ever get to the point where I get someone to reach out and just tell them that my work made their impact, oh, that would make my day. And I think it's beautiful just to constantly remind ourselves that you never know who's going to see our work, and it's going to bring joy to someone's day. And you have certainly brought joy to my day, and I can't thank you enough. I'm going to give you one if you're looking for something to add to your list of lists on your phones. What I do, this is more of a fun one, and my sister's going to get so mad at me right now because I'm about to put her on blast. But I have a list on my phone where it's like the best quotes, and I'll write down like the date, and maybe like the setting that we were in,
Mm.
and it just brings me back to the moment, and it makes me laugh, which I love. I think everyone needs to laugh every now and then.
So I have a list on my phone of some of the best quotes. And when I say best, I mean just completely out of left field. Like, what were we thinking? So here's one for you. This was on August 8th, 2021. I was in my sister's bedroom and we were just sitting there. And my sister goes, "Isn't it crazy how we don't have bones in the tip of our fingers?" And I had to pause for a little bit, and my sister's name is Morgan. I had to say, "Morgan, what do you mean by that?" And she proceeded to plead her case very adamantly about how we don't have bones in the tip of our fingers, to the point where I had to physically go on Google and show her that she was wrong. So I encourage you, whatever you're doing, maybe you write something that you find humorous, or you see something, you come along, or you just hang out with friends. That's a good one for me. Is just write it down. You'll get a lot of joy out of that one.
Yeah. No, I love that. Siblings are the best.
I'm sorry, Morgan. And she listens to these too, so I'm not gonna tell her about this, but she's gonna get so mad.
Um,
It's all love, though. It's all love.
yeah.
Once again, a massive thank you to Kaki for joining me for today. It really is awesome to see someone so close to me in age write her own book and promote such a healthy message. It really is inspiring. Once again, if you enjoyed today's show and you want to see even more incredible conversations, please follow along and leave a rating. It really does help to grow the show. And I can't thank you enough for being a supporter. This really is a privilege to be able to put this on for all of you. Until next time, I'll see you.